Oh yeah, what time does Sean Connery show up at Wimbledon?
What?
What time does Sean Connery show
It's
up?
a joke,
right.
isn't it?
Go on.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Well, it should be tennis.
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
He desperately needs her to survive.
It sort of handled some incredibly delicate topics incredibly well.
I will never watch this again. What was that?
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar.
I'm James Smith.
Let me just go and change my shirt.
All right. Hey guys, and welcome back to Off Radar, Series 3. Hope you are doing well. My name is James Smith. I'm joined by James Eatock.
Hello.
The people won't know why we laughed at that. and
They never do, don't worry.
That's true. And Neil Brock.
Hello.
But for the sake of this podcast, we call him Nige. Now, for anyone that's new to this pod, this is how it's kind of worked in the past. In Series 1, I interviewed a whole host of interesting people, including a boxer, a comedian, a musician, a poet, and so on. And then the three of us also got together and we recorded some movie podcast. We listed our top 5 favourite films of the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, the 2010s. And then me and Eatock also chatted through every Rocky film, so be sure to check that out. What else did we do? I think we even did a rom-com special for Valentine's Day in Series 1. And then in Series 2, we turned this thing fully into a movie podcast. So each week we watch a film, we go away, we watch it, we chat about it, and then we give our rating and review out of 10. So here we are at Series 3, we're going to continue with this format, and then maybe every few episodes we'll have a kind of chat about a certain actor or director or writer and have a bit more of an open one. Anyway, today we are talking about First Blood, which I believe I picked for us to watch. Now, if you guys don't know us that well, all three of us are Stallone fans, right? And I think if you go back and listen to the Rocky episode, you'll hear mine and Eatock's quite long and interesting way of how we got into Stallone. But yeah, so go check that out. But Nigel, also, I take it you're a Stallone fan.
Sorry to say, confess to my sins, that I am indeed a Stallone fan. I think it probably was the Rocky films that first introduced me to him, and then from that was mainly Rambo, and then a few other ridiculous films like Stop or My Mum Will Shoot, Demolition Man, of course. Stallone had a very, very hit and miss career. Well, has had a very hit and miss career. We were discussing just before we came and started to record this some of his more recent films, which are probably best not to be discussed right now. But yeah, Stallone, you kind of know what you're going to get with him. He likes taking his shirt off. He likes being that strong guy. You can't understand what he's saying half the time, and yet there's this element of charm that means you just keep coming back, and a sort of element of ridiculousness to him as well, I would say. But yeah, he is like one of the quintessential 80s action heroes. Like, you've got him, you've obviously got Stallone, and then you kind of perhaps go down a level to the Dolph Lundgrens, the Van Dammes, and so on and so forth. But Stallone's definitely an elite action star from the 80s.
And Eatock, just briefly as well, like you like me, like got into Rocky when you were young and made silly films and stuff like that. But was your intro Rocky as well to Stallone?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was like Rocky. I think it was the Mr. T one, because obviously I was a big fan of the A-Team, and then Rocky 3 happened. I think my gateway into that was, oh my God, Mr. T's in a film and he's a boxer. I can't remember like the specifics of it, but me and my friend were like huge into Rocky in the very early 80s. So yeah, I think we talked about it on the Rocky podcast, but when I was a kid, me and my friend would do like draw boxing comics, and it was always James Crusher, who was me, or Roger Dodger, who was him, versus Mr. T. So we had it out for Mr. T, but he would always beat us. Also, oh my God, Nige might remember this, on the Amstrad CPC 464 and probably other home computers, there was a very basic boxing game called Barry McGuigan's Boxing. It was phenomenal. Like back in the 80s, it was amazing. You literally just, two little sprites going up to one another and like, you had like 3 different punches you could do. But it was so addictive. I played it a few years back again. I was like, I can't get past, what was his name? Like Cannonball. There's probably a load of like racist names in there now as well, like in this day and age. But yeah, it was Bulldozer. I can't remember. They're all of these crazy names. But you could never get to Barry McGuigan. It's like, I'm never going to get to fight. But you got to go through
this fictional Barry McGuigan.
Yeah. Well, you had to get through like 30 boxes or something. It's like you're playing an Amstrad in the 80s. It's like it's going to take years to get to the end. But I mean, I don't think it would. But yeah, so I was big into boxing. And obviously back in the 80s, boxing was like, Bruno and Tyson. And it was just so exciting. So like Rocky was just, Stallone was that thing. But Rambo was never really on my radar. It was all about Rocky. And then, I was always been a Stallone fan. Although I will say, like, I haven't seen a lot of his other films. I've seen bits here and there, but I've never seen like Stop or My Mum Will Shoot or... Or I knew that was going to.
There are some good ones. Like there's Tango and Cash is probably better than it gets credit for. Like him and Kurt Russell. I've got a sort of a list of them up in front of me now. I'm just looking at them. Like Escape to Victory is like iconic, almost for the wrong reasons. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then you've got Over the Top, which is basically a film about arm wrestling, which sort of almost speaks for itself. But yeah.
And then he kind of went into this kind of like action phase, which definitely came off the back of First Blood and Rambo, with like Daylight and Cliffhanger and those kind of 90s.
Cobra as well. Sort of was a bit, bit
it was
more
quite
80s.
Edgy 80s film.
At the same time, like wasn't it in the mid 90s? And it's a film I've always wanted to see because I've heard good things about it. I've always wanted to see Copland.
It's good.
It's really good.
Because it's never like got Keitel in it and stuff like that. Maybe
it's got a massive cast.
More or less. Yeah, like De Niro, Harvey Keitel, Ray Liotta. I think
Ray Liotta's in it.
Yeah. Wow. So, and it's definitely worth checking out if you've not seen it. And Stallone in it is fantastic as well. Like again, he sort of plays against type, where he's always like the big strong guy, and he sort of go and check it out for yourselves. But he's certainly not that in this.
No, I remember like reading an interview of him back in the day, like when that came out, and it was like, it literally said going against type and playing almost like a meek character. And it's like, Stallone doesn't do meek. He does like, kind of thing. So, I do need to check that out at some point. Maybe that's one for the podcast, actually. That'd be a good one.
Yeah. I haven't seen that since it came out. It's a really, from what I remember, a really good film. For me, just briefly, go back and listen to the Rocky one. If you can find out my full Rocky Stallone love affair of what we went through when I grew up, and even the Benny films, which are basically my friend Ben, and we filmed Ben becoming Rocky, Benny.
Also, you did your very cleverly worded Rambo homage, which was Benbow.
Which leads us beautifully onto First Blood. Bembo.
So good.
Maybe we should have reviewed Bembo today. Maybe next time. So First Blood. Let's get onto this bad boy. So First Blood was in 1982. So Stallone definitely had a part in writing it, along with Michael Crozill and William Sackhelm.
Well, it's based on a book, a very successful book as well. So yeah, obviously they took that to the screen.
Yeah, and I think you can tell that from the film. It's directed by Ted Kotcheff, who I had no idea who he was when I was looking him up, but there's a few films that you'll know, but one of the biggest was Weekend at Bernie's, quite bizarrely.
Really?
That's just, like the thing with old Teddy Boy is he had films that like did well at Cannes, like the Golden Bear in Berlin, and yet for us he goes down as directed like First Blood and Weekend at Bernie's. But he is a very reputable director. He did some amazing things. He did a film, I think, after First Blood that did really well at the box office with Fred Ward and Gene Hackman in, that was called Uncommon Valor. But yeah, like
Right.
it's one of these where I think for us, not really knowing the 70s as well as we do sort of later eras, there's a few films in there that were pretty big and pretty well known. Probably the biggest was North Dallas 40, which is like an American football film, one of the best sort of sports movies. When you see all those like the best 50 sports movies, it's always in there. It's got Nick Nolte in it. It's definitely worth checking out. But yeah, in terms of since then, I think, and certainly for like a modern movie watcher, you wouldn't really have any idea who he is, which is probably a damning indictment on our knowledge of directors, I'm afraid, as much as anything else.
Yeah, maybe. And obviously, as we said, it stars Sylvester Stallone. It's got Richard Crenna in and Brian Dennehy, who plays like the kind of
Brian
main
Dennehy,
cop.
who I got introduced through South Park, the movie, and there's a song about Brian Bontano, and Brian Dennehy shows up, and that was the first introduction to who the hell Brian Dennehy is. And then obviously he's amazing in First Blood.
I was going to say, both of those guys I've not really heard of, but apart from... Richard Crenna is basically in all of the kind of Rambo films, so he's kind of recognisable from that. But they've both got kind of bit parts in lots of films that you will recognise, like The Green Mile and stuff like that. But they're just not very well-known starring roles, I would say, in many films.
Well, the thing was as well with Rambo First Blood, originally cast as Colonel Troutman was Kirk Douglas. So obviously Kirk Douglas was a huge name to be attached to it. But for the want of not giving spoilers away right at the start of this review, albeit I imagine a lot of people have already watched First Blood, there was a certain bit that happened in the book that wasn't carried over to the film. And when Kirk Douglas found that out, he pulled out. And this was like right at the last minute. I think they called Richard Crease to come in and actually fill that role on the Friday. They started on the Monday and they were still feeding him lines during a lot of his scenes because he hadn't had time to actually learn any of it. So the fact that he sort of came in so late and put in such a amazing, memorable performance and then got a whole franchise out of it is quite impressive.
Morning. You visiting somebody around here? You know, wearing that flag on that jacket, looking the way you do, you're asking for trouble around here, friend.
It starts off with a bloke called John Rambo, and he's a drifter, he's an outsider, he's approaching this kind of small town, and I think by the way he's dressed and appears, to me it's fairly obvious that he's an ex-soldier. And then he encounters this kind of rude and disrespectful cop, played by Brian Dennehy, and the cop like basically offers to give him a lift. But then he like drops him on the outskirts of town. Anyway, after a bit of like kind of toing and froing, Rambo kind of wants to just go into this town and he's kind of being refused. The cop arrests him, and then back at the police station, there's a couple of really interesting scenes straight away. He gets washed down with a huge hose and then he's beaten up and humiliated. And I guess at this point, you're definitely you're with him. You're on Rambo's side. You don't like the way they're treating him, and then all of a sudden he basically flips because he gets these kind of like Vietnam flashbacks and breaks free, becomes a fugitive, goes on the run in the woods, and there's a massive manhunt to capture him.
You got someplace I can eat around here?
There's a diner about 30 miles up the highway.
Is there any law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me.
Well, it's funny, like right at the start when Rambo first comes into town, because basically he's gone to visit one of his ex-soldiers from Vietnam, and he finds out that person's died, and that's the last person in his squad to have died. So now he already feels vulnerable and alone. And he's walking to this town, which is called Hope, which is obviously quite an ironic name considering what happens in the film. But the cop, straight away, you see him like chatting to everyone in the town. He's like, oh, hey, buddy, hey, blah, blah, blah. And you think, oh, he's just looking out for his town. But within about 10 seconds, you realise he's a complete dick because of the way he treats Rambo. And it's so quick and it's so unnecessarily harsh.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, immediately that puts you on the side of Rambo in this film.
I want you to book this gentleman for vagrancy, resisting arrest, carrying a concealed weapon.
It is also it's also a weird thing in that, you know, you watch it and you just think, oh, just leave Rambo. Like, this guy doesn't want you in his town. and there's only going to be trouble. but at the same time, like the guy's reasoning for not wanting John Rambo there is pathetic, and it's crazy, isn't it? It's the kind of anti-Vietnam sentiment, isn't it? It's like these guys fought in Vietnam, and as has been documented in numerous places, including Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. These poor guys came back, and they were either seen as almost like the baddies because it was like a pretty unjust war.
Well, and they lost,
and they lost.
Never lose. Yeah,
they never lose. And these poor guys came back, and they came back to nothing. There was no, if there was any support, it was minimal. They came back. They'd find their, lives had, the lives around them had changed completely. And so with this film, like John Rambo is just a drifter, but old Dennehy sees him as like, oh, we don't want your sort around this town. It's like, if anything, you should be inviting him into a diner and, buying him a piece of cake or something, saying like, thanks for your service, sorry it didn't work out, etc. But you can see, and like Nige says, Dennehy's kind of attitude is the town is, everybody loves each other and it's all great so long as it's running the way he wants it to. As in, he's almost like, it's like power corrupts, absolutely. And Brian Dennehy is like, this town runs fine so long as no outsiders come in. It is very much, and it's beautifully done.
Like a kind of Western kind of feel. It's really interesting as well that with that, I don't think like they really talk about him being, like a soldier or like to begin with. So
not to begin with,
and you kind of. You know that he is from when you see him, and that the cop just kind of he can see that in Rambo, but Rambo is never going to kind of tell him who he is or where he is, and for that very reason, there's this instant kind of
butting of
blood,
heads.
Butting of heads, and
I like that, Smith. Bad Blood. That should have been the name of one of the films. Rambo, Bad Blood.
That was the prequel, yeah.
Bad Blood.
But you straight away you see that he's got PTSD. He's lonely. You don't know anything about his past. You know nothing about kind of who his family is, and I'm not sure if we even really figure that out in many of the films, to be honest. Which is, without jumping ahead, one of my gripes about the kind of franchise that what we get with him is pretty much nothing, and I know that's partly due to the fact that he's been at war and he's almost like quite just removed from life.
Galt, what the fuck was that?
Well, the man said clean him up.
One thing, not to go on a different tangent, but one thing I really love about the casting of Stallone is that young Stallone has those, doe eyes, like those really kind of, you see into his soul, and it's such a great performance, not to jump ahead too much, but him as like this tortured soul, this drifter, he just plays it through his eye, like his face and his eyes so well throughout the entire film. It's such a great performance. He looks like, as I was watching, I wrote down in my notes, like at times he just looks like a young Pacino. It's like, my goodness.
It's funny you say that, because Pacino was going to do the film. He got offered it and turned it down because he didn't think the character was crazy enough. Because in the book, the character's crazy. In the book, he massacres people. He's completely on edge, and there's a whole other dimension to the book in a sense. And they kind of tease this a little bit in the film, where we just discussed old Sheriff Dennehy's sort of problem with Rambo. Well, if you look at the scene where he stood at his desk in his office, behind him there's a Purple Heart. So Dennehy's backstory was he went to the Korean War, so he was in person in the army, but the Korean War got completely overshadowed by Vietnam. So it's this double layer of, obviously everyone got sort of booed, disliked for coming back from Nam. There's all this disillusionment. We've seen films like The Deer Hunter, and it was really the first war where the films that made about it weren't celebrating like America's success or the good guys winning, I suppose, as you would see it in Hollywood. So there was this added layer of just complexity with those characters. And Stallone, again, sort of, you kind of mentioned it, and he's sort of doe-eyed. He's obviously PTSD. He's very quiet. He's not basically listening to that authority. So all those things combine to Dennehy just being a bit of a dick, which I'm going to keep coming back to. He's a bit of a dick.
He is. Old Dickie Dennehy. Yeah.
And I guess what happens in the film when he escapes is really interesting. That he kind of shifts his way into the woods, into the forest. It's almost like what he's used to being back in Nam.
It's so good.
But the kind of forest and woods it feels really like raw and kind of dirty, and it almost feels like the woods near me, if that makes sense. It just feels
Vietnam. It feels a bit like Vietnam,
but I've got visions of Smith taking his shirt off and running through the forest and falling from the tree branch, going as he breaks his ribs and all that stuff, and
Bembo 2.
Bembo 2.
Bad blood.
Bad blood.
And but it kind of escalates in this film.
Oh man, does it?
Like really quickly. It starts and you're like, okay, he's escaped. It's like
he's on the run.
Yeah,
the escape's insane as well.
It's brilliant.
Let's just talk about that for a second, because he basically runs into the street. They're like shooting at him, and he steals this like scrambler motorbike, and he just goes for it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Brian Dennehy gets in a police car and chases him, and they're like going over fields and doing these huge jumps.
It's a great chase.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Really good.
And then what happens next is he's in the woods, but it gets more and more escalated. And you're talking about in the book him being really kind of crazy, and that's really interesting because in this you always get the side of him which gives the benefit of the doubt, so there's always, even if he's kind of defending himself, but he's not trying to injure anyone, he's holding back. But there's some amazing scenes. There's a scene where the helicopter kind of comes and he's like on the edge of a cliff almost. And they start and they start shooting at him, and as the viewer you're like, what the hell are they doing? Why they're shooting at him? There's no need. And he does this jump off of the cliff onto like a tree. And he cuts his arm, and I remember this scene, probably the most vivid scene in the film that I can remember, having not watched it for years and years. And he cuts his arm, and then what happens next is he kind of like sews it up, and it's an amazing scene because it does feel really raw and real, and as you say, like Stallone in this moment in this film is so vulnerable, kind of mentally, but also now physically. He's got this kind of ailment, and the cops are, they're kind of just doing what the sheriff tells him. So it's a fascinating kind of look at like how we view bravery and how we view kind of people that have gone to war, and kind of character study, but also at a time in the 80s, like 1982 this was, looking at mental health as well, which we talk about a lot more now, but back then I can't imagine we did very much. So I think it's quite a brave film or brave book from that point of view.
I think it's interesting, like we haven't really talked about the Rocky films, the Rambo films that come after this, where it kind of discards a lot of what's in First Blood. So you mentioned the mental health stuff. Come Rambo 2, Rambo 3, so on and so forth. It's like that's in the past. Every now and again, he might get a bit of like a flashback that serves to move the story on, but there doesn't seem to be any real depth to it. Whilst, as you said in this, and similar to kind of like the Deer Hunter, where it really did show the struggles of people who'd come back from Nam, I think this does a really good job of just, like you say, showing his vulnerability. The fact he doesn't want to cause them problems. The fact that he could almost snap them like a twig. Like it's amazing when Colonel Troutman comes into the film. Now, Troutman is the guy who trained him, and his name's like Samuel Troutman, and they wanted to call him Samuel because it's Uncle Sam. It's the American training of this killing machine, which is essentially what Rambo is. In Nam, he was part of a special unit, and every time Troutman talks about him, it's like he's in love with him from afar. He's like, "Oh, John Rambo, yeah, you're gonna need more body bags and all this."
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
I mean, like I found him to be the most quotable guy in the film. Like he turns up, and I think one of his earliest lines is like, "God didn't make Rambo, I made him."
Never possessed God in heaven to make a man like Rambo.
God didn't make Rambo. I made him.
Who the hell are you?
Sam Trotman. Colonel Samuel Trotman.
And then, he's like, we'll send 200 men. He's like, if you send that many, don't forget one thing. It's like, what? He goes, a good supply of body bags. This is it. Just,
it doesn't quite fit with the rest of the style of the film, does it? Because it suddenly turns into like Die Hard quotes.
I don't think it's that bad, to be honest. I actually thought they do fit into the film. It's just they stand out because we are so used to those kind of quotes, especially in late 80s films where it's just like, Arnie films, stick around, he had to split, all these things. So those quotes do stand out. But like, I still think they're within the context of the film, because at that point when the cops have set up their manhunt base of operations, it is all kind of highly charged, and there are some crazy kind of quotes flying around. Another one I remember writing down was what is it? We ain't hunting him, he's hunting us. Just like, because it's true though. But all these quotes aren't, they sound silly and they sound like great taglines for a poster, but they do work within the confines of the movie because they're so damn appropriate.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing.
What?
A good supply of body bags.
Dennehy's character, when they're on that manhunt, is almost saying like, "What the? Stop trying to kill him!" Like, I think he even says that.
I want him alive.
I want him alive and stuff. And it's like, we don't like this guy and we want him a prisoner, but we're not here to kill him. Whereas you get the guy in the helicopter who's like, he's like Brian Dennehy's character, but next level hatred. You can tell he's like proper like, "You long-haired faggots," that kind of attitude. He's like,
he's the one who kind of attacks Rambo in the police station.
In the thing,
He's the one who starts beating him, and that's what pushes him over the edge. So.
When he died in that helicopter, I was like, yes! I was like, come on, Rambo, let's lay waste to these motherfuckers. So you kind of, and that's the thing, it's like you do start, like Smith said, you find yourself siding with John Rambo. You become very sympathetic to his, it's like, this guy's doing no wrong, but then they, as soon as the cops, as one of their own dies, and it's like, we gotta get him. And it's
it's so unjust, isn't it? It just feels unjust. Yeah. That's where you get that sympathy. And like they call in the National Guard and everyone's there and they're all trying to take him out. And the National Guard are like their army, sort of, but not really. And they're clueless. Like they're just doing it as like a weekend thing. And
that bit when the scene when there's like, they think they've got him in a cave or something.
With a rocket launcher.
You guys are great. All right, Steve.
Yo.
I want you and Bruce, head around these trees, go to the front of that mine.
Screw that, Clinton. I ain't going up there.
No way.
And they're like, why don't you go around and get him? It's like, I'm not going to go around. Everyone's just terrified of him.
But it's the thing, every time they think they've got him, it's like, we killed him or whatever, or we got him. And then the old Colonel, was it Colonel Sam you said? Troutman, just like, Troutman. He's just like, you didn't get him, kind of thing.
Yeah, just a right little smile, like, okay, you got him. Yeah, good one.
There's so many scenes in the film, and I for all its action scenes, as we're talking about, it's like great action scene, and the action scenes are great. Him on Stallone on a motorbike, it's like Rambo on a motorbike. It's just like, oh really? And then you watch it, it's like, oh, this is great. There's a great chase, him through the woods, him in the helicopters, even the big shootout at the end, where he basically shuts down the town. All these great action scenes, but I mentioned it before, or up to this point, but I'd never seen Rambo before. I'd never seen.
Wow! You'd never seen this film?
I've never seen Rambo 1, 2, 3.
What?
The first Rambo
I didn't even ask you guys this time because I just knew you'd seen it. That's
the
really
first
surprising.
Rambo I saw was the one you and I saw in the cinema, where he walked at the end. He did the long walk.
It's a long road. Oh wow!
It's a long road.
Oh man! Like the other films are just Ronald Reagan 1980s.
Oh yeah, no, don't get me wrong. So this is the interesting thing. My point is that going into Rambo, I'd always heard good things about it. It's like it's a much better film than people think. But I grew up in the 80s. I'd never seen Rambo, but what I knew about Rambo was almost defined by Rambo 3. With him, red headband, shirtless, like cut like Rocky IV. And it was almost like, from what I could gather, this isn't me, I haven't done any reading or research into this. It's almost like what happened with Rocky to a degree. Rocky 3 and 4 became, as I've said before on this podcast, like comic book movies. And I feel like Rambo transitioned into that as well, which is understandable because the 80s were all about, Arnie, Van Damme hero as well, the action hero, glossy physiques that I could only dream about having. That kind of ridiculous, oiled up guy going with machine guns or fighting. So it's almost like
Hot Shots Part 2.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. But and I kind of get that transition of like so what Stallone did was, he's got his boxer movies. He's like, this guy's boxing, and then he's like, I could do an army movie with like lots of guns, because you're seeing stuff like Commando Arnie, literally the first shot of Arnie in Commando is just his bicep or his thigh or something. Or in Predator, him in a tiny pair of pants. Where's this podcast going? I feel like I'm just talking about men's bodies. But it's welcome to the Men's Bodies podcast. But yeah, I just feel that Rambo became almost like a parody of itself, because much like Rocky, whenever it was satirized in modern in media at the time, it was always like, Rocky was like, and it's like you go back and watch Rocky 1 and 2, and it's like he's not that character. And then the same with I remember Weird Al did a film called UHF. I don't know if Nige remembers that, with Michael Richards. I saw that in the cinema in Canada in '89, and in that film there's like a sequence where he does a parody of Rambo, and it's like, it's great because Weird Al has this like big muscle suit, scarily convincing, but it's like literally him in a helicopter, like screaming out of the helicopter, like pressing a button and just things exploding everywhere. He's like, ah! But it's that thing of that's what Rambo became in the public conscience of, and I think when I saw this film, I was kind of expecting him to be like, with guns and stuff. And it's like, oh shit, this is like a scarily character heavy film, which I thought the ending was like amazing. Like I expected Rambo 1 to end with him having beat the bad guys, as in the cops, and walked off into the, it's a long road, and him just walking off into the sunset, like knowing that he defeated the baddies. But him crying on the floor, I was just like, what the fuck? And it's
that monologue as well.
And it's an incredible performance.
He doesn't really talk much in the entire film.
Not at all.
And nobody would help. No one helped me say, please, I want to go home. I want to go home. He keeps calling my name. I want to go home, Johnny. I want to drive my Chevy. I said, well, what? I can't find your fucking legs.
The scene at the end, there's so much character in that, and that performance at the end, that monologue, just unbelievable. I can't praise it highly enough.
The original cut of the film was like 3 or 3.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
The actual cut ended up being about 90 minutes. Stallone hated the film so much, that original cut, that him and his agent tried to buy it back off the filmmakers.
What, the one we saw, that's...
No, as in the 3.5 hours.
Right.
Hated. So what they did, they basically convinced them to cut Stallone's sort of role in it down loads. Don't have him speaking, don't have him in it anywhere near as much.
Wow.
Also, there was a scene, there's a lot more flashback scenes of him in Nam as well, which they got rid of loads of. There's one, for instance, where he's with a Vietnamese prostitute who was played by the green-eyed Asian woman from Big Trouble in Little China.
No way!
So there's a random one, and that's on the DVD extras as well.
Oh, wow.
But, so there's all this stuff that got cut out, and Stallone thought it was going to be a bomb, but it was the only film, when it actually got cut, when it got turned into what we've watched today as First Blood, it was the only film from that era, other than Rocky, that didn't tank. Everything else he touched was terrible in that era. There's like that fist film and all sorts. And really, the film was saved by the fact it was cut down, and it wasn't this sort of... I keep mentioning The Deer Hunter as being like the quintessential sort of Vietnam film from that era, and same with Apocalypse Now. Like, they were long films. And this, it kind of met that nice middle ground of there being enough action to keep you going, but the classic kind of like 90 minutes where you can enjoy it, get a lot out of it. There's a beautiful monologue at the end. There's the action scenes. There's the Troutman being amazing. Dennehy in it as well is absolutely fantastic. He is such a great bad guy in it that it really, without him, I think the film would really struggle. So yeah, it's crazy. Like, one of these films that some people might say is perfect, or at least really, really good, could have been something completely different.
I could have killed them all. I could have killed you. In town, you're the law. Out here, it's me. Don't push it. Don't push it, I'll give you a war you won't believe.
I really enjoyed this film. I'd seen it a long time ago, but coming back to it again, I hadn't seen it in a long time. I kind of watched it as a teenager, so I kind of looked at it in a different way. But looking at it now, I really enjoyed the feel of it. There's a lot of kind of just him surviving, and some, that survival side is just really interesting, because some of it, he's not even being chased, he's just like in the woods, and it's almost like Bear Grylls with baddies, but then you've got the slightly deeper side, which we've obviously all spoke about, which is the kind of the mental health awareness of like war vets and what they've gone through, and so many films around that time and since have raised that, and I think we're more aware of that in this climate now than we have ever been. And I think it was a really important time for this film to be made. If I had to pick, what I didn't like as much, I feel like I really enjoy him. I think he's awesome in it, but I do feel like the backstory, and I know this is kind of on purpose, but it kind of does make sense now that you say that it was cut down so much. The backstory for me is weak over the whole franchise. I feel like I don't get to know him properly. I sympathise for him. I like him, but I like him more because of the baddie being so bad rather than being so drawn to him, if that makes sense. I almost wanted to know a bit more, but saying that, I still like the kind of mystery about him and his character. So it's a weird balance that maybe they did get right. And
maybe it's because you're from that opinion piece. There is you're looking at the franchise as a whole. The 5 films?
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you bear in mind when they made this, they were probably just making Rambo, just that was it. It's not even called Rambo, it's just called First Blood, isn't it?
The original book, Rambo dies at the end. So,
what? Really?
He dies, and that's why Kirk Douglas quit the film, because he found out they'd changed the script and Rambo was going to live. And I think they might have even shot a few different endings for it as well. I think one of them where he sort of pulls a gun on Troutman and ends up sort of pulling it, and another one where something explodes and sort of blows him up, and he sort of goes out in a blaze of glory type thing. There was one where they were almost going to do a slow-mo, like Butch Cassidy style, where he sort of runs out the front door. So yeah, in terms of what's bizarre is obviously the author wrote the original, and then 2 of the next books he wrote were like the movie adaptations of Rambo 2 and 3, because there were no books because he died. So it's like that gave them so much liberty to just say, well, we've done the book now, we can just do whatever we want. And sort of, as I touched upon earlier, that kind of Reagan era where everything just seemed to be cranked up to just ridiculous levels. Like you said, Rocky 3, Mr. T, all that stuff, Hulk Hogan wandering around. They just thought, well, let's just make it like America is great. It is the quintessential America fuck yeah, like Rambo 2, Rambo 3. Those films definitely fall into that. I think it is important, just going back to Smith's point, to separate First Blood from those films, because it's like separating Rocky from Rocky 4. Like, we know they both have their charms and their qualities, but they're so different when you actually just sit down and watch them. And I think it would shock a lot of people.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think if you look at First Blood and you look at Rocky as solo films, pretend nothing else follows them. Yeah, they're really incredible kind of
standalone films on their own.
Standalone films. And don't get me wrong, I thought Rocky gained a lot with everything that followed. Obviously 3, 4, and 5 are a little bit like but Rocky 1 and 2 and stuff, and there was just a lot there, I think. But with I think, let's be honest, I think Rocky had a better lifespan than Rambo ever had. Yes, because I think the problem, like when you look at I think we went to see, I don't know if I can't remember if you saw it, Nige. The John Rambo film, the big, the sequel that came, what was it? Was it 2010 to 2009?
Something like that. Cinema,
yeah. And I really enjoyed that. And then obviously they did a recent one, but I just feel that they're really trying to, get everything, scraping the barrel, I think is the best way to put it. The argument can be said they've done that with Rocky for sure, but I just feel that Rocky's character is more, he's more charming, obviously. He's a completely different character.
You've been on the journey with him, and I think that was my gripe. Yeah. But you're probably right. It's probably a bit unfair. It's probably with the franchise, but as a whole, like, I don't really know Rambo. Whereas Rocky, you feel like you've lived his life, if that makes sense. And
that could be the tagline for Rambo 3. It's like you don't
know me.
You haven't lived his life. You weren't there.
You weren't there.
Like, no, I wasn't born.
I think one of the stupid things about Rambo is the sequel's called Rambo First Blood Part 2. So it's just like, we'll just tack it on. It's the same film, but it's Part 2. And there's one thing that I am absolutely stunned that hasn't been mentioned so far by you, James Etok, and I'm disappointed in
hang on
for not mentioning this.
Wait. What would it be?
There was a Rambo cartoon in the 1980s.
Oh, of course there was. Shit, yeah.
Rambo, The
Force of Freedom. Yeah.
Which ran for 65 episodes.
They made 65?
Yeah, and it was released a year after First Blood Part 2 came out in 1986. One series, 65 episodes.
And everywhere, the savage forces of General Warhawk threaten the peace-loving people of the world. There's only one man to call. Get me Rambo. From the canyons of skyscrapers to the canyons of remote mountain peaks, Liberty's champion is unstoppable. Rambo, helped by the mechanical genius known as Turbo, and the master of disguises named Cat, the honor-bound protector of the innocent. Rambo, the force of freedom.
I was looking on YouTube when I thought I'd go and look at the trailer before we did this podcast, and there's an hour-long ambient music meditation video where it's basically Rambo's face and then just music, and it says
nice.
You can meditate with John Rambo. I watched 8 minutes of it, but if anyone wants to watch the full hour of just like the and look at John Rambo, I'd recommend checking it out.
Jerry Goldsmith did the score to it, and the score is decent. It's not something we really touched upon very much. He's done like loads of things. He did a lot of the Star Trek stuff. Did like a lot of 80s films like Inner Space, Gremlins, Supergirl, Eat Off Again for you. And yeah, I think it really just set a nice tone. But then one thing, probably the thing for me that's like the worst thing about the film, and there's not much that I dislike about this film at all, I feel like the music on the end credits is so out of touch with everything that comes before it.
The song?
It's a Long Road one. Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. Like, where the hell has that come from? And it's so 80s. And the credits that roll almost look identical to the ones you see in Rocky, like the yellow font and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the only misstep for me in this entire
That's actually a really good shout. Yeah, it would, like, imagine if it had just been like some whimsical orchestral piece, very slow, or just nothing. That would have been perfect. But yeah, it's a long road.
So let's go to our ratings and what do you guys think, and what are your ratings? Let's go to you first, Nige.
For me, like I've sort of touched upon, it's that sort of film where I think it's hurt a little bit by everything that's come after it, and Etop made that point very, very eloquently. It was a $15 million budget film that made like 125 mil. It's a film for me that's kind of stood the test of time as well. I don't think it's aged particularly badly. I think the only misstep for me is that weird end music that I just don't like at all. I really hate that.
That's quite an easy fix as well, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I thought the worst thing about, Captain America, the 1980s or 90s one that we reviewed before, if they'd have fixed the score on that, it'd have made a big difference. But anyway, going back to an old episode, do check it out. For me, I absolutely love First Blood. I think there's an element of nostalgia about it, that I watched it in that sort of peak period when I was watching those kind of action-y films, and because it had that extra depth, it made a huge impact on me. And for that reason, I'm actually going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow!
I really love First Blood. I actually watched it today, and I hadn't watched it in quite a long time in preparation for this. And there's just so much about it where I was just like a big smile on my face. And Colonel Troutman especially is just brilliant. I've just dug up one of his quotes, which I just absolutely love because it's so ridiculous, but it's also fantastic, where he just comes in and he's just like having this serious conversation. He's like, setting them up for you? That's like bringing the pigeons to the cat. It's just like, who would ever say anything like that? Troutman.
Oh yeah, so I love this film. I like Nige just mentioned there, he has the nostalgic aspect going into this, which I don't think has played a big part in his review. I think this is a genuinely good film, like really good film. I didn't have that, so for me it was like watching, an old film I'd never seen before. So I went in with a very kind of clean slate, or whatever you want to call it. I loved it. I thought it was good on so many levels, unexpectedly good. The action whilst the action was, a big part of it, even like Troutman and the cop, Dennehy, as we're going to call him, even their characters were so incredibly well-rounded And you think, like, usually with, I think my one takeaway from this is, or my one thing coming out of this film is, if anyone's ever talking about like a Stallone film or a Rambo film, I'll just say, like, I will happily stand and die on the hill and say, Rambo's a great film. The first one is like I mean, bear in mind I haven't seen 2 or 3, but I can't imagine they're as good.
They're not good at all.
No, I can imagine. But I will happily say, like, this is one of the best Stallone films. It's one of the, I really, really enjoyed it. So for that reason, I'm giving it a big 8.
Oh, wow.
It is actually Stallone's favourite of his own films as well.
That's probably why he keeps remaking it. But I really like Rambo and Rocky. Yeah, all right.
They have talked about. Didn't they talk about he was going to do like a? Or maybe I'm getting confused. But he was going to do like a young Rambo or a young Rocky film or something. It's just like, just leave it.
I thought you could do like a mixed universe where they meet each other. It's just like split screen Stallone.
Yeah, God, like the Marvel, the Stallone universe.
They will. The Stallone universe. Oh my God. They're like,
I'm really good at arm wrestling.
Each one bringing their own skills to the table. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I mean, I'm really. Yeah, I'm slightly surprised by your scores, but pleased by your scores. I was a massive Stallone fan growing up. I watched this film a lot when I was growing up, but I haven't watched it since. And, I love coming back to it in the same way that you guys did and watching it for a standalone film on its own. And I think it's a really solid film. I think for me, it's not quite as high as you guys, though. I can't quite figure out why. I don't have a lot of bad things to say. But for me, it's like one of those films I'll watch again. I think it's a really good film. I think it's one of Stallone's best films. If I was rating Stallone's films, it would easily be a 9, but I'm not. I'm rating it as a film on its own. So yeah, it's a 7.5. Yeah.
And you call yourself a Stallone fan right now? Stallone is sitting, he's like,
"Oh mate, you obviously haven't seen Oscar."
He's like, "I felt a disturbance in the force." He's at home right now in Los Angeles, feeling like something's happened in the world. It's uneasy. What it is. Smith just gave you a 7.5, Rocky.
Yeah. Well, that's a long road.
It's fine. He's just going to come and re-edit this. Stallone do his own edit of his podcast.
Oh, my God.
Said, if it was a Stallone film, it was a 9. He'd just be like, yeah, done. Delete the rest.
Thank God he didn't direct Rambo, because we'd have the,
the director's cut. Or
my God.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
And... Yeah. Well, guys, tell us what you thought of First Blood. Do you agree with us? Is it a very good film, or do you disagree? Get in touch. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. Tweet us at offradarpodcast and let us know what you think of it, or any of the films we've reviewed so far.
It's a long road. It's a long